Welcome into another episode of Discard for Magic. I'm one of your hosts, Aaron.
I'm another host, James or Jexic, and today we're welcoming on Nick from Bitewing.
Yeah, Nick from Bitewing is perfect.
Nick, we're really excited to have you on. Why don't you give a little introduction for people who haven't heard of you or don't know who you are about like what you do and what Bitewing is?
Yeah, so I am one of the two co-founders of Bitewing Games, and the other one is Kyle. And we are both dentists for our day jobs. And we started this company together a few years ago because we kind of went to the same undergrad and same dental school and played board games together and kind of just fell down the rabbit hole of publishing eventually. So here we are. We've released over a dozen games at this point and have plenty more on the way. But yeah, having a great time with it all.
Why don't you just take us a little behind the scenes of how did you fall down that rabbit hole of like becoming a board game publisher? Because I feel like that's not an easy thing to do. I feel like that's not something you just like walk into of like, I think I'm going to be a board game publisher today.
And I would also think that, being a dentist takes up a pretty good chunk of your time.
It definitely does. I mean, Kyle's definitely still a full-time dentist. I'm part-time. I do 20 hours, which is still, plenty of work. When we were in dental school, particularly, like I really got into playing board games and I had played and enjoyed a few of, the more popular mainstream games before that. But I mostly played video games growing up. And for whatever reason, being in dental school, that kind of just pushed me into exploring more board games and exploring the hobby on a deeper level. It was nice because I lived in a townhome village area where there were a lot of folks in my situation, professional students and graduate students, that kind of thing. So we're all pretty busy and relatively poor, and board games was kind of an easy way to hang out together and enjoy some gaming, enjoy some competition, and let out stress, that kind of thing. Eventually I started tinkering with designing games and kind of fell down that rabbit hole first and learned a lot about how to design and play test and develop and then eventually pitch games. And I tried pitching a few of my designs for a couple of years. I ended up going to Gen Con and pitching there and to Origins and stuff. It's definitely a grind to play test and develop and pitch your own games, especially if you're trying to get them published, because there's definitely more designers out there, more people pitching their designs than there are publishers able to. It's tough to get your foot in the door if you're trying to get a product made and you're relying on publishers to do it. But eventually, Kyle helped play test some of my designs along the way, and he kind of got into designing, but we would get together and just play published games for fun as well. But eventually we got to the point where there were one or two designs that we felt, yeah, these are pretty solid. And I knew enough about publishing at that point just from listening to podcasts and stuff. The Board Game Design Lab is a really good source. And Jamie Stegmaier, obviously, he has a huge blog, goes pretty deep into publishing and crowdfunding and such. So I felt pretty comfortable with that. And all of a sudden it went from, publishing would be way too much work, there's no way I'll ever do that for my own games, to being like, well, let's try it for one of our small card game ideas that we have. The thing about starting your own publishing company is, unless you're coming out of the gates with something that is just looks amazing and is very unique and innovative and just catches a lot of attention and it kind of just goes viral in the hobby, it's tough to get the ball rolling, right? You need an audience who's willing to support you on day one when you launch a project on crowdfunding. Thinking about that, we realized, it'd probably be easier if we start by publishing somebody who does have a fan base already, somebody who a lot of gamers trust and like their style of game. They will, support a brand new publisher who's putting out a trusted designer's games. So that's how I ended up reaching out to Rainer Knizia, just kind of emailing him out of the blue. And he's the Willy Wonka of board games, so he's just constantly pumping out new ideas. He lives and breathes game design, and then he has plenty of unpublished games that has just never been made. He has plenty of older games that haven't been printed in years or decades. So he had plenty of options for us, and we were looking for small casual card games. And so his team showed me a good handful of games. I tried them all, and we narrowed them down to a few. And yeah, that was kind of the first step. I discovered that I actually really enjoy that process of reaching out to a designer who I like, whose style of game I enjoy, and then finding promising games or finding something I really love within their pitches, and then figuring out how to bring that to life, and then working with a talented artist to do that. That actually turned out to be something I preferred to do over designing my own games, which is a whole different beast, I feel. Yeah, we kind of hit it off with Reiner, and then we published Trailblazers with Ryan Courtney, and yeah, next thing we knew, we kind of had our own side business that started out as kind of just a little passion project. So that's kind of how we got to where we are now, just still doing it and having a blast.
Did you ever end up publishing any of your own designs, or has it all been other people's?
The first project, we were actually planning to do like 1 or 2 Knizia card games with what eventually became Gussie Gorillas. We did not end up publishing that in the very first project because we found some good options just among Reiner's games that he pitched to us. And they all kind of fit together thematically. So then it became, let's just do a Criminal Capers collection. So that was Soda Smugglers, Poo Mafiosi, and Hot Lead that we did with him. That process was going well. And during that time when we were preparing to launch those games, I also wanted to bring back a new version of Quo Vadis, which is it's a negotiation game from 1992 that hadn't been published for many years at that time.
Yeah, about 30 probably, yeah.
Yeah, Reiner was on board to do that with us as well, and then that's where we figured kind of, okay, well, if we're going to publish this negotiation game with Reiner, we might as well put Gussie Gorillas with that, because that's also a kind of a chaotic negotiation game. So they pair well together. They target the same audience. So we pushed that back, and that ended up being our third Kickstarter project that we did. So yeah, that was the one that did end up getting published.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting aspect that you guys have taken at Bitewing. So it sounds like you liked Knizia's games a little bit beforehand. Had you fallen in love with a lot of them? Because I know now you guys are maybe the biggest fans of Knizia, ranking tons of his games and spending tons of times just finding hidden gems that haven't been played that are Knizia's in forever. So
yeah, I think early on when I was exploring a lot of different games, very early on when I saw stuff like Through the Desert and Tigris and Euphrates, you look at those and they look like very dry, very calculational games. They're not super thematic or colorful or vibrant or anything like that. Through the Desert has become more so with the candy looking camels and stuff. Even so, I eventually started to try a couple of his games and realized these are great because they are approachable. They're rather elegant. They're easy to get to the table and teach pretty much anybody. But then there's some really good depth and strategy to them where they reward repeat plays. They reward more plays with the same players, and there's a lot of interaction between players as well. It's very much above the table in a lot of ways, not just a heads down, solitaire type of thing. And then he has range, right? Like he's published some of the best 2-player games ever in stuff like Lost Cities and Battle Line, all the way up to chess-like strategy game, big box board games, and a lot of stuff in between. He just seemed like a good person to reach out to start working with. The more that we've worked with him, the more we found this is a really good collaboration between us, because my tastes as a publisher who this is not my main job, the thing that motivates me to spend late at night working on some kind of project that we're doing for Bitewing instead of just relaxing or whatever. It's the games that we can find that I really love, that really hit the spot for me. Reiner obviously does that. And so it's just been easy to come back to him. And especially with Zoo Vadis, where we found okay, we have something here. When that one went from a game that nobody was talking about, hardly anybody was still playing, no publisher really cared about, to one of the hottest negotiation games of recent years. That's when I realized, okay, there's a treasure trove of these old Knizia games that in a lot of ways, like Quo Vadis, are untapped. They haven't reached their full potential, I feel. The other thing is when Reiner pitches a game to me, sometimes it's similar to another game that he already has published, right? And so if I want to make the very best Knizia games I can and sign on to the best designs that we can find from him, then I should try a lot of his stuff. So that's kind of motivated me to now play over 200 of his designs and research even more. And it's fun too, because again, most of his design ethos matches up with my gaming taste. So most of the time I enjoy them, not always. I don't love all of his games. Yeah, he definitely hits the spot more consistently than most designers for me.
I don't know how many designers you can say that about, that you've played 200 of their games.
I don't know if there's another designer you can say that about.
Yeah, wild.
Even someone like Richard Garfield, who just designs a ton of games.
Mm-hmm.
and lives and breathes it. I don't think he has that, anywhere near that many titles.
Yeah, I mean, you have full-time game designers who usually put out multiple games per year. You've got like Wolfgang Kramer and Michael Kiesling and Uwe Rosenberg and Bruno Catala, stuff like, designers like that. But it seems like Reiner has been doing it for
So
longer
long.
than most of them, and like since the late 80s. Also, he like lives and breathes this. He doesn't have any kids. He is married, but he wakes up, I think, at like 4 or 5 a.m. and just gets straight to designing. That's like his hobby and his passion and his pursuit. And so, like from
Even
morning
still.
until dusk, it's like design, playtest, rinse, repeat. So that's how he's been so productive over the years.
That's amazing.
One of a kind, that's for sure.
Because I was thinking, like, when you said 200, I think I've probably only played around that many games, period, but I don't know. Could be more. But, like, I think I've got maybe, like, 5 Knizias I've played and more than I'd like. I know I've played Raw, Medici.
Yep.
That's another one that probably hasn't been published in a while. I think Rio Grande did it in, like, the 90s.
Well, Grail Games did it not too long ago, and then
Okay.
more recently, another publisher reprinted it. So yeah, some of those like really famous classics just keep getting reprinted every few years for sure. Yeah, most people know him either for his auction games or for like his tile laying strategy games, but he actually has a surprising amount of range. I've played party games where it mixes like bingo with Mario Party style challenges. I've played dexterity games like Viking Seesaw, where you're stacking things on a seesaw trying to avoid letting it tilt. He's done speed games where it's like the fastest person to snatch up stuff wins. He does kids games, family games, like you name it. The only major one that he's never done, as far as I'm aware, is like worker placement, which seems like an obvious one for him to do, but I guess it's just not his style or something that interests him. But yeah, he's done deck builders and cooperative games and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, it's interesting to see his range for sure, though.
James is probably on board with that lack of worker placement. He's not a big worker placement fan.
I almost said something. Yeah, worker placement, I feel, is just kind of, I don't know, I shouldn't dog on it right now.
No, it's fine. I mean, everybody has their own tastes, right?
I mean, my thing with worker placement is that it's usually a board, but usually the board, it doesn't have any relational or like positional.
It's just spots you're putting.
It's just spots. It's just like,
yeah,
it's like basically action drafting, but called worker placement, and you get to put your workers. And coming from Summoner Wars, there are a lot of games that like have a map where you do stuff together, or you're fighting over different space. Like I like games like Root and other dudes on a map games and stuff like that, where like
for sure
there's more conflict just based on the space, but it can be less direct conflict like that. I like things like Thurn and Taxis and Power Grid and things like that, where it's like, okay, we've got a map and we're doing stuff. Or even Catan. I still like Catan, and a lot of people will turn their nose up at it these days, but
yeah.
James, you just mentioned Root. I know Cole Worley is one of your favorite designers, Nick.
Yeah.
But that's not really like he does a lot of games that aren't really in Bitewing's wheelhouse yet.
Yeah.
Is that, are there any designers like that you like would love to work with, but they don't make games in Bitewing's wheelhouse? Would you like to expand Bitewing's wheelhouse to those games?
The thing about a Cole Worley style game is those are very demanding projects, right? Like they spend often years playtesting and iterating and developing, those kinds of games, and they need a lot of playtesters. They need a lot of feedback and data, things like that. And I can see why that kind of game has thrived at Leader Games, because they have a whole studio where they can test it internally, and then they have a dedicated fan base who will come into their studio and play test it, and then they have an online fan base who will play test it there. So like difficult for us, like Kyle and I, to take on as projects, because like I said, we're dentists, right, by day. So for us to like find the time to really polish a monstrosity like Root or Arcs or John Company second edition, it's just like that would take us years to, I think, get a game like that to where it's ready to publish. So what we've found, typically what I do is I enjoy playing lots of different games. I probably play almost 50 new releases each year, and that's me trying to seek out mostly, like I try to play some of the hot games and just get an idea of like, okay, what are people loving and why. Most of those are games that I'm personally interested in, and I really think I might want to own permanently or at least try out. When I find a designer whose style of game I really like, or I find like, oh, I've enjoyed another one of their designs in the past, and they seem to generally hit the spot for me, and they kind of fit our target audience, that's when I'm usually reaching out to them to say like, hey, we'd love to work with you if you're interested. Here's a few different kinds of games that we are looking to make in the near future, and see if it leads anywhere, right? But usually it works best for me if it's like an established designer who really knows what they're doing, and so they can just bring to me a finished design that doesn't need much in terms of development or further play testing or stuff, because our time is very limited. And so I usually leave that burden to the designers. Although there are some projects we have coming up that I'll probably be hiring some external developers to take a look at, games that need to be fleshed out more or whatever. Yeah, for the most part, like either I leave it to the designer to polish the game, or we need to hire it out, because I can help play test and evaluate, should we publish this? And I can definitely get feedback as far as, hey, I think we should take it in this direction, or I don't like this, or I love this. Let's enhance this more. Yeah, it'd be super hard to do a Cold Worley style game, or even a heavyweight Euro, just because of how demanding they are.
Now that makes a lot of sense. Speaking of different designers, though, you have really at Bitewing only worked with a couple of designers. Is that by design? Are those just the designers that you guys are comfortable with? Are those just the designers that you've found make the products that really fit your audience?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is we've definitely attracted a certain type of audience. With Reiner Knizia, it's people who like games that usually play in an hour or less, that are easy to get to the table and have some hidden depth there to them, and some good interaction typically. Ryan Courtney, he was just, I've enjoyed his initial games like Pipeline and Curious Cargo and such. He was tweeting about a new design he was working on that was a hiking themed game. And it was like, oh, I like hiking. So I just reached out to him out of the blue and was like, hey, is this tied to a publisher yet? We're interested. We had a good relationship with him where we continued by doing a Trailblazers expansion and Spectral and stuff. And we worked with him less now, but that's only because he is trying to self-publish at this point, and he's got some really cool stuff in the works. He likes the more control over his games as far as the art direction and stuff like that, and designers who love that business aspect of it and more of that creative control typically end up gravitating to self-publishing eventually. So that's kind of the direction he's headed. Robert Hovakimian, who we've published stuff more recently with, he is very much a Knizia-esque designer. And so because we've very publicly made ourselves known as Knizia fans, and he was making that style of game, he actually reached out to us. We found that, one of the games, Bebop, that he pitched was a good fit. And so we've become friends with him, and I definitely like his style of game. And so we're often seeing stuff that he's working on and considering it. Yeah, outside of those designers, if you look at this year's releases, we are planning to release 6 Knizia games this year, and 2 from Robert. So it's like, yeah, they work with very few designers. Actually, starting with our very next project, which is wave 2 of our Mythos collection, our 2-player line, we are working with new to us designers. That kind of continues next year. We've signed or planning to sign some other designers that we have not worked with yet. Some of it comes down to, I find a designer that I really love, and I reach out to them, and sometimes you just never hear back. Maybe they live in Europe, and the only contact information I can find on them is their Board Game Geek account. And maybe they're never on Board Game Geek, so they just never see my message. Other times they are, super busy with just life in general, and they design very few games per year, and they're already comfortable publishing with maybe a big dog publisher like Repos Productions or, Asmodee or one of their branches. And it's like, if you're a designer who publishes 1 or 2 games per year, and you have multiple publishers interested in it, which publisher do you go with? You probably go with the one that you've worked with before, and or the one that is like huge, like much, much bigger than Bitewing Games and can move more copies, right? So it's a slow process. Generally, the designers that we do work with, we come back to them and say, hey, we want to do this style of game, or hey, do you have anything new? We'd love to do another game with you. And that's why you see us kind of dip into those wells again.
Yeah,
you're going to see a lot more variety from us very quickly, I think, over the next year, especially.
Just talking about how the company is growing. At what point will Kyle start working less, or you guys just stop being dentists, or is just being a dentist too lucrative? How much game publishing do you think you'd need to be doing for that to be reality, I guess.
Yeah, it's tough because on the dentistry end of it, like both of us, we've gotten through all the difficult hoops. We've jumped through all the hard hoops and gotten through like the hardest part. And now it's like, I guess you could consider it easy money, but it's like you do 8 years of, undergrad and professional school, and you invest all the student loans and stuff. And now we're at the point where it's like, I still have a mountain of student loans that I'm trying to pay off. And all I have to do is show up and like fix teeth, right? And
Right.
like I get the paycheck. With Bitewing Games with publishing, the margins aren't nearly as good. It's definitely more of a grind and it's more of a risk because both of us, we have our own families, kids, things like that to take care of. But actually, it's funny you bring that up because this year we were both talking about like, yeah, we should cut back hours. Bitewing's done really well lately where our inventory doubled last year, our sales doubled last year. Like it's growing rapidly, right? And then in comes tariffs.
Yeah, that obviously I'm assuming your production is like in China or somewhere, or
Yeah, pretty much almost all publishers are making their games in China because that's, there are a few options for factories in Europe, and then there are very, very, very sparse and pretty bad options for manufacturing in the US or in other places outside of Europe and China. But basically, China's like far and away the leader in board game manufacturing, which means currently Bitewing Games and most other publishers are facing 145% tariffs, meaning the costs of our games are 2.5 times more than what we were expecting last year when we started the print run, right? And paid for the initial costs. And so it's like, okay, things are about to get very, very expensive for companies. And if they don't have cash on hand, that's where they're in trouble. And for us, we do have extra cash on hand that we've saved for emergencies like this. But even then, it's like, man, tariffs are a lot, and the publisher's paying it.
yeah, it becomes less. I wanted to say sustainable. Like you said, you had some cash on hand, but you can't just keep doing that forever, and it's just kind of a tenuous situation when we don't know if the tariffs will stay or things like that.
Yeah.
And how to adjust to that reality, I guess.
Yeah, so essentially we went from having like realistic salaries for the amount of hours we work. Like I do 40 hours a week for Bitewing Games. Finally paying us like a livable salary just from Bitewing, which is awesome. It's like you have 2 employees and a fully functioning business. But now with everything, the expected costs and the expectation that our sales are going to be worse, especially in the US, because we're going to have to raise our prices on any games that we import with those tariffs. We're just kind of in anticipation of that. We've basically just wiped out our own salaries and we're just keeping that extra cash on hand. I could not live on Bitewing Games right now just purely due to the tariffs. And so it's like, yeah, maybe this is a bad time to cut back on dentistry. Maybe long term, if this situation improves, then yeah, we, like Kyle was talking about, working only 4 days a week instead of 5, and then I was looking at cutting my hours in half or something like that. But unfortunately, not going to be something we can do in the near future.
It is unfortunate. Has your relationship with like Allplay, because I know you guys became partners with them not too long ago, does that help the situation? Because they help with like your distribution, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think if we were not partnered with Allplay right now, like we would be in a much, much worse situation. We'd probably be looking at just like shutting down, honestly, because most publishers rely heavily on classic distribution. Like there's these really big distributors. Asmodee's one of them, but there's others in the US, a couple others.
Like Alliance and some of those other ones.
Alliance, and I mean one of them was Flat River Group, but yeah, they shut down one of their Greater Than Games. For some reason I can't remember the other one we were with before Allplay, their name. Oh, PSI, that's what it is. So these companies, they mainly sell, the publisher's games to retailers, and then they take a cut for warehousing and selling your games, passing them along. And so publishers get like a very small percentage. It's usually like 33 to 38% of the total price of the game actually ends up in the publisher's pocket for them to turn around and spend on reprints or on the next game, or pay salaries, things like that. But and some publishers have like really nice websites set up though, and they do direct sales. A lot of publishers obviously rely on crowdfunding too, which really helps because the margins are much better with direct sales and crowdfunding. But with Allplay, it was an interesting origin there. Basically, over a year, no, it's at this point it'd be 2 or 3 years ago, I noticed that they were just running like a really efficient and tight ship. Essentially, I'm a fan of their stuff, and I've been playing their games for several years now. But I noticed, like, All Play's a little different from most other publishers in that they do their own fulfillment and they have their own warehouse. They deliver their games very quickly, and they just seem to have their ducks in a row, right, as a business and a company. So at the time, they were just publishing their own games and obviously tables and mats and other stuff too that they were making and selling. I had made a blog post around that time where it was my most anticipated games of the upcoming year, and I had a few All Play titles on there. And actually, Joe Wiggins, who's the COO, one of the owners of All Play, left a comment on my post like, "Hey, thanks for covering our stuff." And right around that time, like, they were running a Kickstarter that I was paying attention to, and we were about to launch another Kickstarter. And I just thought, man, it would be so nice if All Play was fulfilling our stuff instead of having to rely on like a third party warehouse. And, they were doing an okay job, but it wasn't perfect. It wasn't very efficient for distributing board games and fulfilling to backers and especially fulfilling web store orders. They were only able to fulfill any orders on our web store. They could only do it on Mondays. So like somebody could order Monday night and then their game would not ship out for almost a week. And that just felt like in today's day and age with Amazon, it's like, we're not going to grow very much as an online web store if that's kind of the pace that we're fulfilling at. Again, out of the blue, just like how I emailed Rainer Knizia to see if he wanted to give us some designs to publish, I just emailed All Play and was like, "Hey, I know you guys are doing your own thing. We feel like we're really good at making games, but we don't have the time or ability or resources to fulfill those games and like fulfill a web store or anything like that." I don't know if it was very much a shot in the dark, but it was like, I don't know if you guys are interested at all in collaborating with us and helping us with that. And that was actually the genesis of the All Play partnership program, where they brought us on as the guinea pigs, where they're like, "Yeah, let's do it. We like your style of game, and we just brought on some new staff, and we have the capability and the manpower to fulfill another publisher's games." So we quickly pivoted to them, and they kind of figured out a business model that is actually much more profitable for us, the publisher, because they're not taking as big of a cut as your classic distributor. But it's also much more efficient because it's just basically them doing what they already do, but on a larger scale. Then that just blew up because then Joe started finding he had other publishers reach out to him. They're like, "Hey, we want to do what you're doing with Bitewing." Joe started kind of handpicking publishers that are a good fit for their model and their branding, and to bring on as partners as well. And now they're up to over 20 different partners in only a couple of years. And they've hired multiple staff member who their sole job is like to handle all this extra work just from the partner end of their business. Yeah, they've grown very quickly, and they kind of position themselves as a distributor, which has worked fantastic for us because now we're part of a really clean, really well-oiled web store that a lot of people like. They consider themselves basically an e-commerce company first and foremost. And so they function like that in a lot of ways. They've invested a lot in the past few years in starting a distribution model where they actually reach out to retailers and have retailers start ordering their games and ours and other partners all over the world. And they have warehouses all over the world now. And so it's grown very quickly. And that's why our sales and our success have grown a lot. What's amazing for us is we just focus on making and publishing the games. Like, I focus on making sure this game is as amazing as possible, making sure the manufacturer does it perfectly, just the way we want it. And then once it's ready to leave the factory, then All Play basically handles the rest from there. They get it to ship across the ocean and fulfill the backers and start selling. We still do a lot of the marketing. Basically, our company has grown a lot, but we've still maintained 2 employees despite all the extra projects that we've been able to do. It's been really good for us. I think without that partnership, like I said, we'd be in a much worse situation with the tariffs and stuff going on, because I think most publishers, your middle size or larger, about 60% of their sales happen in the US and 40% happen outside of that. For us, it's even lower, partially just because we haven't reached all the retailers in the US at this point. We're still growing in that sector, but 60% of our games are going outside of the US, which is fantastic for us because those are not getting tariffed. There's sources of revenue that we still have that are keeping us afloat, I guess.
You guys started this distribution model sort of for All Play, but they've really branched out to games of all sorts, not even games that like fit their style, because All Play tends to do a very like 60 minutes or less, like very
Mhm.
straightforward, easy to learn games, smaller boxes.
Yep.
But a couple of the partners they have now, like Druid City, have very massive, like large box games, very like narrative driven or area
Mhm.
control and
Yeah, I mean, they have one company that does like escape room style, like very elaborate big box escape room style games. There's another company that pretty much only does 18xx games because that's one of the all play partners. That's like anybody who's an 18xx fan, they're probably ordering their games from All Play's web store at this point. They've brought on, some European and Japanese publishers more recently. There's a lot of variety, and I think that's very intentional on All Play's part. I think they try to find brands who make, for the most part, like original games, kind of established strong identities and brands. One of the nice things about that is if somebody is backing a Kickstarter for like an escape room style game, then they go through All Play's Pledge Manager later, which is also convenient for us and other publishers. They can also add on anything from All Play, anything from Bitewing, anything from other publishers. And we're all kind of on the same page of doing flat rate shipping in most regions. So in the US, that means $4 shipping. You go to their web store or you go through a Pledge Manager that isn't from an All Play partner, and essentially you can add on a whole variety of games that you want, and the shipping stays the same. And it's just super convenient for gamers in a lot of ways. And now it's become super convenient for retailers who are like, oh, well, I want 5 copies of this game and 2 copies of this game on my store shelf and so on. They can go to one place that has a lot of variety. It's been really good for all of us. It's honestly, I think for All Play, what's interesting is they mentioned like the partner program itself, like they take a cut of our sales. They charge us for warehouse storage. They charge us for like shipping and things like that. So they make a little bit of a profit off of that, but it's really not that much at all. But where they found like a lot of increase in profit and success is just that they are selling more games just by having our games available on their store. And then people add on, they back silos from us, and then they add on a $20 game from All Play to their same order. It's kind of benefited everybody in that way, which has been pretty awesome.
yeah, it seems very similar to my background is in pharmacy. I'm a pharmacist, and it seems very similar into what a lot of supermarkets do with pharmacies. And pharmacies nowadays don't have a lot of profit margin. They don't make a whole lot of money, but they bring all those customers in, and then those customers also shop at the supermarket. And
Yeah.
then that makes them a lot of money because of those. They have a lot higher margins on, and they can make a lot more profit on the clothes and the food and the.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of e-commerce, like convenience and, cheap shipping and being able to bundle stuff is really nice. I mean, I think Amazon has been the one that's conditioned all of us to shop this way. And so for All Play to kind of have a somewhat similar model in the hobby sphere has been really smart. They're very much entrepreneurial minded in a lot of ways, and a lot of the bigger established publishers that have been around for decades and a lot of the distributors that have been around for decades are, in a lot of ways, they're kind of set in their ways and not a lot of innovation happening on that end for some of these companies. We've been fortunate to work with All Play where they're always looking for new paths to make things more efficient or to increase sales or to serve their customers or retailers better. And it just seems like the improvements that they integrate are just constant, really helpful for everybody who's involved, from the customer all the way up to the publishers.
Are there any downsides to working with All Play, or has it just all been great?
Yeah, honestly, I don't have any complaints. Like any other situation that we could be in, whether we're just running our own business completely, doing our own fulfillment, or we're trying to find another partner somewhere else, I feel like we'd be worse off overall. It's like, for me, there's very few complaints that I have. And the nice thing is when I do go to them and say like, I noticed this thing on your website, which doesn't seem ideal for us to be able to sell our games and stuff, or hey, these customers are having issues, like they've been so responsive, feedback, making improvements and investing in improvements and such, that I'm super happy. So it's been really good for us.
All right, I'm going to ask you one of the hard-hitting questions, Nick.
Yes.
What's your favorite design that Bitewing has published?
If you put a gun to my head, I'd probably say Zoo Vadis. I love social games. I love negotiation. I've been a huge fan of games like Sidereal Confluence and Chinatown for several years since really getting into the hobby. Zoo Vadis is such a fun game for me to introduce to people, and it plays all the way up to 7 players. It allows for a lot of creative negotiations where you can see people bring their personalities to the table, and one person, maybe they're cutthroat and they're always trying to milk you for a little bit more in a deal, and another person's really generous and just happy to please anybody with any kind of deal. The way the game is structured, you're incentivized to collaborate and negotiate and make deals. I've seen the whole spectrum of personalities and strategies do well in the game, depending on the context and depending on the group and the way the board situation is. I'm still surprised to find like new deals that I'd never considered. Part of it is there's asymmetric animal abilities and you can't spend them on yourself. The only thing you can do is offer to spend them on another player on their turn. You need to be proactive, get into other people's heads and be like, okay, what do they really want right now? And what do I have to offer that is of value to them? And then how can we both benefit from that? And so that just is a thrilling game for me. Like I said, it depends on the group and the context. Like, want to play or show anybody, like especially non-gamers, a game, I'm going to show them our upcoming release, Bombastic, which is 5 minutes tic-tac-toe meets Nana or Trio. I don't know if you guys have played Nana or Trio.
I have not, but I have seen. We talked to Robert a little bit, so we've talked a little bit about. It was at the time Tic Tac Boom, but changed to Bombastic.
Right. Yeah. So that one I can show to anybody in 5 minutes, and I always have a blast with that one because it's really silly, but it's also very clever and memorable and entertaining. But as far as like, most often I'm sitting down with a group of like 4 or 5 players, right? That's usually or 3, right? That's usually the sweet spot. Or when I'm playing a game, it's usually that size. And if that's the case, then I'd say Silos, which is an area control Knizia game we're about to release, as well as Ego, are 2 of my other favorites, which is just like Ego's just a crazy epic push your luck auction adventure. Those ones been really excited to be very close to releasing. Yeah, I'd say those 4 are pretty high up there for me. But again, it just depends on the group, right? Certain groups, it's nice to have a variety of games because you can kind of gauge based on people's personalities or what they might be into, be like, okay, I have the right game for you, and then that's like the best game in the moment, right? So it really does depend on context.
Now, you said that you and Kyle had a lot of games designs that you worked on, and I'm assuming they all got put to the wayside and only Gussie Gorillas made it out. But yes. Is there any chance you ever think that you'd come back to those? Like if you needed a game to publish, I imagine it'd be easier to get them published now that you guys are a publisher.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we could, if we wanted to, we could easily bring back one of those designs. There were a couple games that I thought were, they still interest me from like a creative standpoint and from a conceptual standpoint. One of them was like a hot air balloon trick-taking game where you're controlling your hot air balloons, definitely inspired by hot air balloon competitions where you adjust your altitude according to the wind and that pushes you in a certain direction. And I feel like something like that would be really marketable. And then I had another game where it was called Yeti Shreddy. It was snowboarding Yetis, and it was a deck builder where I grew up skiing, and I really love skiing, although I live in Arizona right now, so I don't get much of that in this area. It was this game where you essentially are trying to shred the fresh powder and chart your route down the mountain and claim the fresh powder before other people. And then you go back up and do it again, but you're doing that through deck building, playing out cards that let you take certain paths and stuff. Yeah, they were really fun concepts to explore and stuff, but I never felt like those 2 got to a point where it's like, yeah, this game is fantastic. It has longevity. They're fun to play in the moment, but it's like how you compare a game like that to, say I go to Ryan Courtney and he pitches Trailblazers, or Rainer Knizia and he pitches Cascadero, and it's like, oh yeah, out of the gates, this game is really fantastic. I know it's going to sell well, and I really love it. And so it's just easier for me to go to these designers that I love. They are, grinding it out in before I reach out to them or before they show me what they have, killing the games that aren't quite, marketable or aren't quite working. And then those games that do click, they're taking them to completion. That's a lot less time consuming for me, and it's fun to just skip the whole making people playtest a bad design until it's good and banging your head against the wall when you can't fix a problem. Skipping all of that and getting straight to like, oh, this game is already fun, it's already playable, do you want to publish it or not? That's just fun for me to start at that point. But yeah, I could see eventually maybe more likely a co-design with another designer, if definitely more likely a simpler game, just because a game like Gussie Gorillas, I kind of took it to completion within a few months. It didn't take too many iterations or versions to get it to the sweet spot where I was happy with it. Just a simple game. If you have a really good idea and it's simple in terms of rules and components and stuff, it's a lot easier to get that to completion compared to, a medium weight Euro or a deck builder where you have to fine tune everything and you change one thing and it breaks everything else. And maybe eventually, especially if I eventually retire from dentistry, I could see, having more time to really dig into, some more self-published designs.
Why don't we jump into the Summoner Wars aspect?
Let's do it.
Tell us about like how you experienced Summoner Wars, how you found it, and what your thoughts were on the game.
To think back on like what was it that got me into Summoner Wars, and I'm pretty sure it's the easy answer, but I'm almost positive it was just the really great review of Summoner Wars Second Edition from Shut Up and Sit Down. And I think Tom Vassell also covered it. A lot of really great reviews for that game when that second edition released. I really enjoy 2-player games. I play a lot of different popular 2-player games and usually end up really digging them. Seeing those reviews, it was like, sweet, this game sounds great. Sounds like it's up my alley. So that's where I picked up a copy and tried it out. When I play 2-player games, like 99% of the time I'm playing it with my wife. That's the easiest way to do it. If I'm getting together with other friends who play board games, usually it's more than one person the vast majority of the time. So it's harder to bring a game like Summoner Wars if you're wanting to play 2-player, to the game night groups when you have 4 people looking to play a game together. So it's usually with my wife. And so both of our tastes kind of dictate what we end up playing. Yeah, for Summoner Wars, we played it at least a couple times in pretty rapid succession, and I was really digging it. She was less hot on it, I guess you could say. I think there's 2 types of gamers. There are those who enjoy text-heavy cards, right? Due to their versatility, due to the rules and the powers and the abilities and the possibilities that they provide. And then there are those who really hate text-heavy cards. Instead of seeing it as like an energizing, like, oh, we're going to explore these mechanisms, we're going to explore the strategies and the possibilities, it's just like exhausting for them. It's almost like the introvert-extrovert, dynamic of like, do you enjoy going to social gatherings? Does that energize you or does that exhaust you? And my wife is definitely on the, text heavy cards are exhausting to her end of the spectrum. When I played it, I remember writing about it in my blog post. I don't remember too much of what I said, aside from the fact that like, oh yeah, I've tried a lot of dueling games recently. There were some big ones that released around the same time or within a few years at least, like Dice Throne and Unmatched, Summoner Wars Second Edition. Obviously, the first edition had been around longer. Yeah, after trying a bunch of those, I was like, shoot, Summoner Wars is definitely the strongest of these. I feel like it still has a bit of that swingy drama, luck within chucking the dice and seeing what happens, right? There's a lot of depth to the different factions and their strategies. And, the game plays, still relatively, like usually an hour or less, right? Relatively quick. Yeah. And so it ended up being one of my favorites of that type of dueling 2-player game that I had tried. But unfortunately, it did not click with my wife, and where it was just like, well, she's the main one I would be playing this with, especially at that time. I didn't really have any other people I was doing 2-player games with. So I ended up passing that game along. But yeah, I would happily play it again at the drop of the hat. I do have a friend here in Arizona, because we moved here just a few years ago, who I've played more 2-player games with. So he might be one to introduce that game to and see if we can dig into it deeper at this point.
The wherewithal to sift through text heavy cards. My background in terms of gaming was like I started off with like a lot of just like reading those like JRPGs and stuff like that, and also playing Magic. Like I played Magic when it was brand new and had less text than it does now. Now there's so much text on the cards. It was just sort of par for the course for me to always like have to read the cards and figure out what cool combos you could come up with and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Summoner Wars is definitely a game where it sets up really quickly. You can put the game out and be playing within minutes. But I don't think you're not really playing the real game until both people know what all the cards in both decks do. You know,
Yeah.
you could play the same matchup probably 10 times. Like me and Aaron could probably play like Phoenix Elves versus Tundra Orcs 10 times, and still not necessarily know at the end of it who we think was even favored or what, you know, or even know for sure the best way to play the matchup. We might still learn stuff throughout those 10 plays. But now we've got, I think there's 28 factions.
Dang, that's so cool.
Crazy.
There's so many matchups. I've played an awful lot, but I'm just saying, like, there's so much to it. I think it's got not just that there is this breadth of all the different factions, but also, like I was kind of explaining too, is there's the depth that just arises from the positional play, your hand management decisions that I think are absent of a lot of similar sorts of card games.
Absolutely. Rules wise, it's rather approachable in terms of like dueling card games. You compare it to like Magic and stuff, and it's way easier to get into Summoner Wars, I think, and less overwhelming. Strategy wise, there's definitely more of a learning curve, right? And like you said, it's a game that rewards deeper exploration between two players who are willing and excited and interested in really becoming more familiar with the strategies and the factions and the decks and stuff. It's definitely one of those games where like if I had the right person, heck yeah, they're passionate about it as well, then I'm all for it. Like let's dig into this and really discover a lot of those juicy nuggets that are in the gameplay and in the strategies. I am unfortunately the type of gamer who also owns like
A lot of games.
30 other 2-player games, right? 2-player only games. And a lot of those are easier, more approachable. And my wife is not nearly a hobbyist gamer like I am. She's very much a casual gamer who will certain games she enjoys and then other games she'll put up with, you know, I guess is the best way to put it. As something for us to do together on occasion, or when she's willing to, you know, do something with me. And it wasn't the right fit for us at that point in time. Yeah, I agree. I think games like that, and I've tried a few other games. You try it a few times and you're like, oh boy, this is deep. There's a lot to this game. Knizia even has a game kind of in the same genre with Blue Moon Legends. It's kind of sort of a bidding hand management game. It's the same thing. Like I've tried it with her a couple times and it didn't really click with her, but I really liked it, and I was like, shoot, if I had the right person, we'd be going hard on this game.
Yeah, and I think having that right person is really important, because we've found talking to other people, whether we've had them on the podcast or just people from the community, that even if like they love the game and dive in, whether it's their spouse or their friend or whoever they're playing with, if they don't, then there just also quickly becomes like a skill gap of, oh, we can't really play together anymore because I know all the cards and I've played a bunch and you've played like 3 times and very casual about it.
Yeah.
Although I ran across, I won't spoil who they are, but I found some people that through our Discord with Summoner Wars, there are 3 guys that live somewhere in the United States that live on the same street, and they've been playing.
Oh man, it's the stuff of dreams.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
They're, you know, they've got families and stuff too. They're like in their 30s or whatever, but it's just funny because like, yeah, I think one guy just successfully taught one of the other guys, and then they were just talking and they just like, but they actually got it to click and stay, and now they're all playing online. And I think some of the people that'll play, that know each other from real life, will still sometimes play online just because it's easier than getting the physical cards out.
Yeah, I think that's the situation I'm in, where there's maybe 1 or 2 people who, you know, maybe we can dig into this type of game if we really push for it. But usually we're playing 4-player games or 5-player games or whatever. Online is where it's like, yeah, it's much easier to find and set up that type of game. I know the publisher, Plaid Hat, right? They, on their website, they at least used to have like an online version that you could play. Is that still the case, or are there like apps that you could play on PC or mobile or anything like that at this point?
Yeah.
It's on mobile, any browser, so you can play on your PC
sweet.
as well. They've talked about Steam, but that still seems to be a ways off until they can get a synchronous version working better. The real-time option is like a 45-minute timer per player, and that's still not ideal. They kind of want to try to make something that looks at the turn-by-turn timer, maybe kind of more like how Board Game Arena does it or something like that for certain games, so that we could have a better live play option. And that's something they want to do before they release it on Steam, I think. You talk about smaller companies, and like that's another case where like Joe is like the programmer. Basically, they have another guy that helped them with the website, but otherwise Joe is doing lots of programming for all their other titles too.
Yeah, I only have so much time, right?
Yeah.
Although maybe tariffs and all that, like I think the publishers who have kind of a potentially a route to doing more digital stuff and making more revenue off of that, like I think that will push some publishers even further in that direction and motivate them. Let's cut back on these big expensive physical games and do more online stuff that makes us some revenue. Maybe we'll see some growth there in the next year or two.
And just in general, if people are like, well, I don't want to spend 50 to 100% more on a board game than I
Yeah.
already have to, or whatever the case may
Mhm.
be.
And they've done some really cool stuff recently to try and grow the online community. They just had something they added where if you have a subscription to their online system, which is what, $3 a month or whatever, you can add in somebody else for free so they can try out the game and they can use your decks and stuff. And
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'd love to. A few of our games are more online compatible, but we haven't really done much. Part of it's just like finding the right person to onboard our games to online implementations and stuff. That's really cool. It's a really smart way to grow the community, because I see that even with like I'm part of a Reiner Knizia enthusiast Discord server, and you see people there quite often setting up online games on like Board Game Arena or whatever of Knizia games or that style of game. Some of these people have played like Tigris and Euphrates hundreds of times, and it's just because they're able to easily set up these online games. So it's pretty cool.
Well, Joe, the tech guy over at Plaid Hat, we had him run stats, and I've played the most Summoner Wars of anybody.
Nice.
I've seen them out.
Do you have the count? Like, is it logged or is it just?
I can't see it, but Joe told me that it was like, because it only in quotes shows you your last 1,000 games when you look at your data.
Yeah, only.
Okay, that's
So,
awesome. Are you doing this usually asynchronous, I imagine?
yeah, usually
Okay.
asynchronous. I do a fair number of 45-minute games too, but he told me that I'm over 5,000
Oh
games
man,
now.
that's so cool.
That's like in the last 4 years.
I imagine you have multiple games going at once, right?
Yeah, you can play up to 12. I usually don't have that. Even I don't usually have that many. I'll usually have like 5 or 6 going, maybe.
Yeah, you almost have to reorient your brain to be like, wait, which game was this? What was I trying to do in this particular play? You know?
Yeah, especially if you're playing like the same factions, then you're like,
Yeah,
what did I have in this one? And
yeah. You're like, wait,
Yeah.
did I already use that card? Or
Yeah, especially because there's like 2 copies of every card. That's why I kind of prefer, if I can, to play the 45-minute games when I'm able to, because then
nice,
you just sit down and you play that one right there. But
one and done. Yeah.
I joked about I was trying to run two or even 3 45-minute games at a time and cycle through them. I don't recommend that. It's not for the faint of heart.
only for the addicts.
Yes, we need to go hard, right? That's awesome.
The question is, how do I get other people to share that passion? And part of it is just, we do this and we talk about it and stuff. Those guys I was mentioning, they're a 3-hour drive from me, so I'm thinking we can try to do a tournament, like about an hour and a half between us.
Oh yeah,
And try to get other people to show up, and it'd be pretty cool.
Pick a town between you with some good food and make a little event out of it. That sounds like a blast.
And I haven't signed up for Gen Con yet. I've still been thinking about it. Plaid does do a physical tournament every year at Gen Con.
That's great.
Still hasn't been huge. They get like, 16, 25 people maybe.
Hasn't been huge, and they did some wild prizes. They've been doing insane. The first one was $1,000 prize. The next 2 have been like Summoner Wars for life.
Oh, you just get all future Summoner
Everything.
Wars
They will
products?
send you all Summoner Wars products forever.
Let's go. That's awesome.
The guy that won the $1,000, he didn't stay for all of Gen Con, I don't think. I think he just flew in for one day from Boston and then won the tournament and then went home.
Paid for his trip. That's awesome.
Yep.
And some extra probably.
Yeah. That's why it's probably just sitting there like, so, well, I guess at least you won. Like,
Yeah. I live just 4 hours from Vegas. It's like when somebody goes to Vegas for not even an overnight thing, just for a little fling, and they come back and they're like, yeah, I made money. I made a few $100. It was great. That's funny.
Well, Nick, appreciate you coming on the podcast and chatting with us.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun to get to know you better and chat games.
Do you want to let the people know where they can find you? You got a couple podcasts of your own, blog, and
Yeah, we're on a lot of places. I mean, bitewinggames.com is going to lead you in a lot of directions, whatever you want to find about us. Podcast, my blog, our YouTube channel, which is just Bitewing Games, our web store, which just leads you over to All Plays web store. We do have a Kickstarter project currently live for about 2.5 more weeks at this point, I guess, which is our travel line. This is our new line that we're doing. Games that are very compact, very easily portable, easy to get to the table. They play in about 30 minutes or less, really approachable. That's for a Gazebo and Gingham. One of those, obviously, being 2025, one of those is at least is a Knizia game. That's what's occupying most of my attention right now. So you can go check out that Kickstarter project. It's just called Gazebo and Gingham. For those who don't know, Gingham is a picnic pattern, crossing lines pattern on a blanket. That's a ant themed strategy game, and Gazebo is a garden gazebo area control game. So we're excited about that. That's the main places where you can find us. We're on social media everywhere too. Just look up Bitewing Games. So
I found out about Gingham itself by accident because I was trying to buy a plaid hat and I accidentally bought a Gingham hat.
yeah, well, that's pretty close, right? It's funny. A lot of people I talk to, it's like, especially guys, like they have no clue what gingham is. It's very much. And then you ask most women, especially those who know their fabrics, know crafting and things like that, and they're like, "Oh yeah, gingham. That's it's everywhere. That's a picnic game."
I think that one's also by Robert, right? Correct?
That is, yeah. We're releasing Gingham from him this year, as well as Bombastic, and I feel like he's only getting better with time. Like we put out Bebop and Shuffle and Swing just at the very end of last year. Gingham and Bombastic are even way more approachable, easier to get into, and very clever, fun games. And yeah, you guys had him on recently. He's very new to the scene as far as games that he's released, but he's working on a lot of projects now. Actually, we've signed a few more games with him, and then he's working with other publishers, doing a good variety of stuff too. So I'm definitely one to look out for.
Following that Knizia premise.
Yeah, I mean, I think his goal in life is to become the next Knizia, like basically full-time board game design from dawn to dusk kind of thing. So he's loving it. I hope we can do our part to help get him there because he's very talented. So I hope he gets there soon.
Well, this has been another episode of Discard for Magic, and we'll see you guys in a couple weeks.